Immersed Robot.
Hello everyone, welcome to Immersed Robot. So in this video I wanted to give some final thoughts on my opinions of the Reverb G2. Now I've used the Reverb G2 for a number of weeks now, about 5 weeks I think altogether, and I've been going back and forth between that and the Valve Index as well. And just for some context, there probably will be some comparison with the Valve Index in this video, just while I make some of my points about the Reverb G2. And during that time I did try a lot of different games and experiences in the Reverb G2, all different kinds of experiences as well. And I also tried a number of field of view mods, which is something I was interested to try in order to dial in my experience with the G2 based on everything I'd heard about it beforehand. And I guess really this video will probably be a little bit more interesting if I had some more controversial or more original opinions about the G2 that you probably haven't heard already before. But in most aspects I will say that it's absolutely a top tier VR headset, and it's incredibly well suited to certain types of games, as we've heard before. Sim gaming, this is probably one of the best headsets you can get at the moment, and something like Microsoft Flight Simulator or Elite Dangerous and sim racing, this really does elevate the experience in those kinds of games. However, I will say that the holes do begin to show with motion controller tracking with this headset, but I didn't really get any drift with the controllers or anything like that, and they were pretty solid when they were within the tracking volume of the cameras of the headset, and the horizontal tracking volume seemed perfectly fine to me, and probably about the same as the Oculus Quest 2 tracking. But the vertical tracking volume is really where I felt things fell down a little bit with it, and it wasn't terrible, it wasn't unusable or anything like that, but I did feel that I noticed without even trying when it was unable to track the controllers when they were either too low or too high. And this was an issue where I noticed it first going straight into the Cliff House, the Windows Mixed Reality Cliff House, and when you're using the pointer from the motion controllers, if I held them too relaxed by my side, then I would notice that the positional tracking wasn't being picked up anymore. It was only using the rotational tracking, the IMU based tracking of the controllers, and I had to raise them up so that the cameras could catch sight of them again. And this is something that really doesn't happen in other inside out tracking systems that I've used, or most of them at least, and it especially doesn't happen in something like the Quest 2. So it was a little bit disappointing, that side of things. And I also noticed this vertical tracking volume problem when you were raising the controllers up too high as well. That was when I did notice a little bit of drift every now and again, when they were out of clear line of sight of the tracking cameras. And I think it's just a real issue with this headset in terms of it being a bit of a failing point. However, again, I will just reiterate the fact that it wasn't broken really. It wasn't like it completely ruined the experience or took me out of many experiences, but I would say that it would present frustration in certain kinds of games and things like that. So I think the controller tracking, although fine for most things, is still a point of frustration with this headset overall. Now, with regards to the field of view, I did try several mods in order to increase the field of view. First, I ordered a thinner facial interface than the standard default facial interface, and I fit that into my headset and then attached a number of different face cushions. I initially attached a Vive face cushion which I just had lying around, and then I sort of used varying foam pads and things like that just to get it as comfortable and at the right distance for my eyes with the lenses as well. And overall I just didn't get the comfort with that mod initially, so I sort of abandoned that and went over to this Frankenfov field of view mod, which was actually coined by Sebastian from MRTV, and I watched his video a long time ago. I just didn't realise that he came up with the name Frankenfov mod. So I did try that, and that's basically where you don't have any facial interface at all, and you just get a thick facial cushion and just put that directly onto the headset, and that worked really well for me. There was an issue with some light leakage, and it can be solved. I did manage to solve that, although not in a very elegant way. I sort of managed to sort of tape over the gaps and things like that where light was leaking in beyond that. However, that did increase the field of view quite substantially, and it was comfortable as well for the most part. Not as comfortable as the default facial interface, which is actually very similar to the Valve Index. I just find that very, very comfortable. But the Frankenfov field of view mod that I used, it was fine, and I could use it for a long period of time as well. Now another part of the reason I wanted to use the field of view mods was to actually get close to the lenses and possibly mitigate the sweet spot issues I was having by getting my eyes closer and hopefully increasing the size of the sweet spot in relation to my eye position and things like that. And it didn't really help a great deal for me getting my eyes close to the lenses. Perhaps a little bit, there was perhaps a marginal difference, but not enough for me to really notice too much with that. So the sweet spot remained an issue. The field of view, I will say that even if I wanted to use the default facial gasket, I think over a period of time I would get used to that field of view anyway. So I think that is sort of a lesser issue. The sweet spot is probably the biggest issue with this headset to me, and it wasn't necessarily finding the sweet spot in terms of getting my eyes in the right position. It was more once I was in the headset and it wasn't moving, everything was set perfectly, it was just the edge to edge clarity of the lenses, and I only needed a slight turn of my head to notice the blurring effect of the lenses when you've got text in the very center or something in the very center of your vision. It's perfectly clear, a very slight turn of your head, and all of a sudden, because the lenses in relation to that object that you're looking at have changed, the blurring effect comes very quickly. And this doesn't happen on something like the Valve Index or even the Quest or Quest 2 or the Rift S or pretty much any other headset that I've used, and I have used quite a lot of VR headsets over the years. So to me, this was the smallest sweet spot I've seen, and the edge to edge clarity just wasn't there for me within this headset. The only thing I will say with regards to this is that when I found that I was using just the Reverb G2 headset for longer periods of time, like multiple days in a row, for like a week at a time, this sweet spot issue did diminish for me. And this is one of the things, and the only thing I can think of really is that I was just sort of subconsciously training myself to look in that central point of view and turn my head more than I was used to in something like the Valve Index or other VR headsets, because I did notice this, and it became less and less of an issue as long as I was just using the Reverb G2 for extended periods of time. So I would say that if this is your only PC VR headset or it's your first PC VR headset, then it's not something of a major concern, I wouldn't say, because I just honestly believe that you do get used to it. And with any VR headset, there are all these little nuances that you sort of just seem to get used to after a period of time using it. And this brings me on to one of my points with the G2 and using it alongside the Valve Index. I was going back and forth between the G2 and the Valve Index, and I felt like I was immediately noticing the negative sides of each of these headsets. So for example, after a period of time using the Valve Index, I'd go to the Reverb G2 and I'd immediately notice that smaller field of view and the smaller sweet spot, which was causing me issues. But then after a period of time I'd get used to that and things would sort of settle down and I'd be fine with it. But then I'd go back to the Valve Index and I'd immediately notice the lower resolution in that headset. But then again, after a period of time you sort of accommodate yourself, you sort of get used to it. So even that didn't become too much of an issue. But by having these two separate PC VR headsets that I was going back and forth between while I was trying to get used to all the different things with the Reverb G2, it became more and more of an issue for me. And that was really part of my reason why I was planning on selling one or the other of these headsets anyway. Part of it was I couldn't really afford to keep two PC VR headsets. Part of it was I didn't want two PC VR headsets as well, going backwards and forwards between these different experiences. And that's why after a period of time of using the G2 in multiple different games and experiences, I really settled on the fact that I believe the Valve Index is just a better all-rounder for a wider variety of experiences. However, the G2 and the resolution, which I'll get onto now, is a huge factor which can't really be ignored with this headset. So the resolution makes a bigger difference than I was expecting in certain games and experiences. So Elite Dangerous was one of the highlights for me. The sweet spot issues remained, but when you've got that crystal clear image in the central point of view, it's absolutely fantastic. And there are also no glare issues really, or fewer glare issues with the Reverb G2 in comparison to the Index. So that was a big deal for me. And that resolution bump, as I mentioned in the very first video that I made, my very first impressions of the Reverb G2, it's not even a subtle thing between the Index and the Reverb G2. It's quite a significant increase in resolution, and I was surprised at how much that affected me and how much it affected my enjoyment in certain titles as well. So I will say that the G2 has really highlighted the impact of resolution and how big a difference it can make make in certain VR games, and it's difficult to go back to the Index once you've experienced that level of clarity in the G2. And I will say that is probably the single biggest area that the Index is starting to show its age, in my opinion. The resolution just isn't quite up to the standard that I would like now, and before I tried the G2 I didn't realise that, and so that's probably a bit of a disappointment now when I use the Index, but again I'll probably get used to it once I've used the Index for a period of time again. So I don't think it's going to be a huge problem with me using the Valve Index or anything like that. And I will reiterate that for me the Valve Index, with its better motion controller tracking and the larger field of view and all of these other small things, just make it it's a more solid all-rounder for a wider variety of experiences, and that's really what I want from a PC VR headset at this stage. If I was solely into Microsoft Flight Simulator or solely into Elite Dangerous, then that would be one thing, and I could easily persuade myself just to get the G2 in that case. However, I also like motion controller tracked games as well, like No Man's Sky and Fallout 4 and Skyrim, and I just believe that those are better in the Valve Index in my opinion. But overall I will say that it's difficult to say after using the Reverb for that long and experiencing that resolution, it's difficult to say that I actually prefer the Index overall, but it just provides the most consistent experience in a wider variety of games. So it has to be said that my decision has been to keep the Valve Index, and I have sold the Reverb G2. But I can honestly say that I've thoroughly enjoyed trying that headset for the past 5 weeks or so, putting it through its paces, trying it in a wide variety of games, and I think it's a great solid headset, and especially if you are solely into simulation based games and experiences, then really that is probably the one to go for in my opinion. But again, as a solid all-rounder, the Valve Index wins for me. So just to finish off, this is a personal honest opinion of the Reverb G2 and a comparison to the Valve Index as well. I've got nothing invested really in either of these headsets that means that I should favour one over the other. Whichever one I preferred as the best all-rounder, that was the one I was going to keep, and it's difficult to deny the substantial benefits the Reverb G2 has in certain areas, but it's just not the one I'd choose overall as my day-to-day PC VR headset. But that's my opinion anyway. Let me know what you think in comments if you've tried both of these headsets, where you think the pluses and minuses are on each one. But either way, thank you very much for watching this video anyway, and please take a moment to subscribe if you get a chance as well. That would be very much appreciated, and I'll see you next time.